So I want to stay on the topic and continue the conversation now with Congressman Ritchie Torres from the Bronx. So Congressman Torres, welcome to Picks on Politics.
It's an honor to be here.
And good to see you, by the way, in person. This
Yes.
is the first time in a very long time that you're here in studio. There is a lot to discuss this morning, but we need to address first and foremost the big issue, and that is the gun violence plaguing the city. You represent the Bronx, the borough there, seeing shootings, gang violence, several teenagers, even as young as 13, dying because of gun violence. What do you see as a solution?
So it's a complicated problem that does not lend itself to a simple solution. There's no magic bullet, but certainly there needs to be greater economic opportunity, right? We have a crisis of disconnected youth, especially in places like the Bronx. There are hundreds of thousands of young people who don't go to work, who don't go to school, whose only life is existence is life on the streets. And those young people are particularly susceptible to gang recruitment. So part of what we need to do in Washington, D.C. is pass an infrastructure bill that goes beyond roads and bridges and invest in our young people. Second, we have to abandon the policy of defunding police. You know, police are essential to public safety. What most people want, what most New Yorkers want, is not less policing or more policing, but better policing, more accountable and transparent policing. Third, we need gun safety regulation. You know, we ought to regulate the safety of guns just like we regulate the safety of automobiles. Ever since the federal government began regulating the safety of automobiles, there's been a dramatic plummet in fatalities on the road. We need federal standards of gun safety.
So basically, you're not for defund, right? You want to see more police in areas
We're in favor
of the Bronx.
reforming rather than defunding the police.
Right. So that gets to the crux of the question then of what's happening in Washington, right? Because each and every time there's a mass shooting in the country, we look towards Washington, D.C. to make some kind of change, and then there isn't one. Do you see you and your colleagues coming together bipartisanship to actually make this happen, or is it a pipe dream?
It's a challenge because the greatest stumbling block on the path to gun safety is the filibuster. You know, I've said repeatedly, in a rational world, every gun would be registered and safely stored. Every gun owner would be trained and licensed. Every gun sale would be subject to a background check. But we have a dysfunctional political system where one U.S. senator from a state smaller than my congressional district has the power to filibuster gun safety at the expense of 330 million Americans, and that is a structural challenge that shows no signs of disappearing.
Yeah, and that's why you want to get rid of the filibuster, right?
Exactly,
and
because
I think
that's the root of all evil in Washington, D.C.
Filibuster is a conversation for a different day that we will get into because we could spend a whole 6 minutes just on that. I want to get to some local politics right now, specifically the mayor's race. Eric Adams is the Democratic nominee for mayor. You came out early and supported Andrew Yang. Have you had a conversation with Eric Adams? Do you support him moving forward?
I've had no conversations with Eric, but I ranked him as number 2. He is going to be the mayor of New York, and it's almost a certainty. And he has the potential to be a transformational leader in America's largest city. His success will depend on the quality of the people he hires to manage city agencies, and it will depend on how he manages his relationship both with the state legislature, with the governor, and in particular, the city council. We're about to have the most independent and intransigent city council that any mayor's ever had to deal with. And so he's going to have a heavy challenge on his hands.
I want to bring up, you brought up the city council, so let's go there. It's going to be majority women for really the first time in history here. You know many of the players here. You were a former city council member yourself. How do you see this all shaping out?
We're going to see the city council assert itself to an extent not seen before.
What does that mean?
The city council could in theory pass a budget without the mayor. So it would not shock me to see the city council play a greater role in setting the budgetary priorities of the city. The city council is the final word on matters of land use, matters of development. And I suspect the council is going to become much more skeptical about development than it's historically been. But I think what's beautiful to watch is that we're going to have a city council that is finally every bit as diverse as New York City itself, that it's truly going to capture the mosaic of New York City as a multiracial democracy. When
you say they could pass a budget without the mayor, don't the two usually have to come on agreement?
It's typically negotiated, but we're going to have a much more aggressive city council that might exercise its authority to an extent we have not seen before. You just have much more aggressive personalities in the city council.
Right. I want to talk about big news for families and what they saw in their bank accounts this week. A lot of people saw their direct deposit come in the form of the child tax credit. A lot of our viewers chiming in about this very topic. The big question is these monthly payments will last through the end of the year. What happens after that?
So the American Rescue Plan extends the child tax credit for 1 year. The president has proposed an extension until 2025. I have introduced legislation that would extend it permanently because, in my view, a progressive permanent child tax credit would be to families with children what Social Security has long been to senior citizens. It should be a permanent part of the American social safety net. Without Social Security, 40% of senior citizens would be languishing in poverty. The child tax credit is the most transformative investment in families in the history of the United States. There is no policy that has brought us closer to eradicating poverty in America than an expanded child tax credit, and it ought to be a permanent part of the social contract.
So if you want to keep it going, right, extend it past the end of the year, where do you get the money?
Look, I see it not as an expenditure, but as an investment, right? If we lift our children out of poverty, we are changing the trajectory of their lives. We're improving their social outcomes, their lifelong outcomes. You know, research has shown that child poverty costs our country up to $1 trillion every year. And for every dollar we invest in our children, it generates $8 in returns.
Lastly, we only have 30 seconds left, and I do want to touch upon this, and that's voting rights. A big push to get federal legislation to protect voting rights for Americans. Why should New Yorkers and New Jersey care about this?
Because nothing is more fundamental than the right to vote in a democracy. And the most powerful tool that we had for protecting voting rights was pre-clearance, which was gutted by the Supreme Court. From 1965 to 2006, pre-clearance was effective at preventing 1,200 voting restrictions from taking effect, particularly in the South, and we need to restore it as the national standard.
A lot of ground covered here. You are welcome back on this program because we have a lot more to talk about, but we're simply out of time. Congressman Ritchie Torres, good to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.